By sundown, every soul in Coldwater Creek would know about the note, but in that first terrible moment, Mabel Hartley only knew one thing. The whole town had stopped breathing just to watch her be unwanted. She stood on the church steps with a basket of warm biscuits hooked over one arm, her Sunday gloves patched at the fingertips, her blue dress tugged tight where it always tugged, and the May wind lifting loose strands of hair against her cheek. The bell had just finished ringing. Families were spilling into the street. Men adjusted their hats. Women gathered in little circles, smelling of lavender, soap, and judgment. Mabel kept her eyes on the road ahead, the way she had taught herself to do whenever whispers followed too close behind. Then Calvin Price stepped out from beside the hitching rail with a folded paper pinched between two fingers. "Miss Hartley," he called, loud enough for the boardwalk to quiet. "Seems somebody left you a message." Mabel stopped. She knew before he opened it. Some hurts had a smell to them, sharp as smoke before a fire. "That is not mine," she said softly. Calvin smiled like he had been hoping she would say exactly that. "Well, your name is on it." A few people turned. A few more leaned nearer. Across the street, Ethan Whitaker stood beside his wagon, one hand resting on the rail, the other holding the small gloved hand of his daughter, Lily. Ethan was not a man folks expected to interfere. Since burying his wife 2 winters ago, he came to town only for feed, flour, nails, and silence. His little girl had not spoken above a whisper in nearly as long. Mabel saw them only for a second, then Calvin unfolded the paper. His voice rose clear in the bright churchyard air. "No man would want a woman shaped like that." The words struck harder because nobody gasped. Not at first. There was only a pause, the kind that lets cruelty settle where it wants. Then someone coughed. A young woman covered a laugh with her hymnal. An older man looked down at his boots, not ashamed enough to help, only ashamed enough not to look. Mabel felt heat crawl up her neck. Her fingers tightened around the basket handle until the woven cane creaked. She did not cry. She would not give them that. She reached for the paper. "May I have it?" Calvin lifted it just out of reach. "Now, why would you want to keep a thing like this?" "Because it was meant for me." Her voice did not break, and that seemed to disappoint him. Behind him, Mrs. Adler murmured, "Poor thing," in the same tone a person might use for a limping horse. Mabel took one step down from the church porch. Her ankle turned slightly in the dust, but she caught herself. The basket tipped, and one biscuit rolled out onto the step. Nobody moved to pick it up. That was when Lily Whitaker let go of her father's hand. Ethan noticed too late. "Lily," he said, low and warning. The little girl crossed the street in her white bonnet and scuffed brown shoes, walking straight through the open space the town had made around Mabel. Every whisper died. Mabel looked down as the child stopped before her. "Hello, Miss Lily," she said, barely louder than the wind. "You best go back to your papa." Lily did not go back. She looked at the biscuit on the step, then at the paper in Calvin's hand, then at Mabel's face, as if she understood more than any child ought to. Mabel tried to smile, but her mouth trembled before she could stop it. "It is all right, sweetheart. You do not have to feel sorry for me." Lily reached up with both hands and took Mabel's free hand in her own. Small fingers. Warm palm. A choice made in front of God, dust, and every cruel mouth in Coldwater Creek. Ethan Whitaker went still beside the wagon. Calvin's smile thinned. Mabel could not move. The note fluttered in Calvin's grip, forgotten for one perfect second, while the little girl who feared nearly everyone held tight to the woman the town had just named unwanted. Lily's hand was so small that Mabel could have pulled away without effort, but she did not. She stood there on the church step with the biscuit basket crooked against her hip, the dust of Coldwater Creek under her shoes, and that warm little palm holding hers as if the child had found something worth keeping. No one laughed now. Even the horses at the rail seemed quieter, heads lowered against the soft May wind. Calvin Price still held the paper, but his arm had dropped to his side. The pleasure had gone out of his face. Cruelty liked an audience, and for the first time that morning, the audience was looking at the child instead of the joke. "Lily," Ethan Whitaker said again. His voice was low, but it carried across the street. The little girl did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Mabel's hand, her thumb rubbing once over the worn seam of Mabel's glove. Mabel bent carefully, lowering herself until she was closer to the child's height. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "your papa is calling you." Lily looked up at her. Her eyes were gray like rainwater in a tin cup, wide and solemn beneath the brim of her bonnet. Mabel had seen grief in grown folks often enough to know it could sit inside a child too, only smaller and heavier. "You should go on back," Mabel said. "I am all right." Lily's fingers tightened. It was not much. Just a small pressure. But it told the whole street that she did not believe her. Ethan stepped off the boardwalk. His boots struck the packed dirt one slow step at a time. He was a tall man, lean from ranch work, with sun-browned hands and a face that looked as if it had forgotten the habit of smiling. Folks made room for him without being asked. Not because he was loud. Ethan Whitaker had never needed loud. He moved like a fence post in a storm, quiet and hard to push over. He stopped beside his daughter and looked first at Lily's hand in Mabel's, then at Mabel herself. "Miss Hartley," he said. "Mr. Whitaker." Her voice came out thinner than she wanted. She straightened, but Lily did not let go, so Mabel remained half-turned toward the child, caught between dignity and tenderness. Ethan glanced toward Calvin. "Give her the paper." Calvin gave a short laugh. "It was only a bit of town foolishness. Then you will have no trouble handing it over." The street held still. Calvin's jaw shifted, but he folded the note once and held it out. Mabel reached for it with her free hand. Before she could take it, Ethan did. He looked at the words only long enough for something cold to pass through his face. Then he handed it to Mabel without comment. "I am sorry, your daughter." "Had to see that," Mabel said. "So am I." The answer was flat, but not unkind. Lily tugged gently at Mabel's hand. Once. Twice. Toward the wagon. Mabel shook her head. "No, honey. I cannot go with you." The child's mouth trembled. Ethan noticed. So did half the town. He crouched beside Lily, careful not to touch her too quickly. "What are you doing, little bird?" he asked. Lily did not answer. She only pulled Mabel's hand closer to her chest. Ethan looked up at Mabel again, and for the first time, she saw uncertainty in him. Not pity. Not judgment. Something more troubled than either. "Do you have work today?" he asked. Mabel swallowed. "I had washing due at Mrs. Adler's, but I expect she has changed her mind." Mrs. Adler looked away fast. Ethan stood. "I need help at the ranch." A murmur moved through the street. Mabel's face warmed again. "Mr. Whitaker, you do not owe me anything because your little girl is kind. This is not charity." His eyes flicked to the basket on her arm. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you keep a kitchen?" "Yes." "Can you be patient with a child who does not like questions?" Mabel looked down at Lily, whose hand still held hers as if the answer had already been given. "Yes," she said softly. Ethan nodded once, as if the matter had become practical enough to survive. "Then ride out to Whitaker Ridge. 1 week. Wages paid fair. You will cook, clean, and help with Lily until I find someone proper." The word proper landed badly, and he seemed to know it the moment it left his mouth. Mabel gave him a small, tired smile. Proper women do not usually receive notes like that in front of church. Ethan looked toward the paper folded in her hand. "No," he said. "I suppose they do not." Lily took one step toward the wagon and brought Mabel with her. This time Mabel followed. Not because the town had softened. Not because Calvin Price looked sorry. He did not. She followed because a little girl who had every reason to fear the world had chosen her hand in front of everyone, and Mabel Hartley had been unwanted long enough to know when a miracle was too rare to refuse. The wagon rolled out of Coldwater Creek with the town shrinking behind them and the sound of church bells fading into the rattle of wheels over dry ruts. Mabel sat on the far side of the bench, her basket tucked against her knees, the folded paper hidden inside her glove as if cloth could keep words from burning. Ethan held the reins with both hands and looked straight ahead. Lily sat between them, small and still, one shoulder pressed against her father and one hand wrapped around Mabel's finger. The child had chosen that arrangement herself, and neither adult seemed brave enough to undo it. For the first mile, no one spoke. They passed the blacksmith shop, the feed yard, the last whitewashed fence at the edge of town. Then the road opened into long Montana grassland, rolling under a pale sky. Mabel watched dust lift behind the wagon and wondered how many people were still standing in front of the church talking about her shape, her dress, her shame, and the widowed rancher foolish enough to carry her home. Ethan finally cleared his throat. "Miss Hartley." "Yes, sir. I meant what I said back there. This is work." "I understood. You will have a room off the kitchen. You will cook breakfast and supper. Midday meal when the hands are close enough to come in. Laundry once a week. Floors when they need it. Lily keeps mostly to herself, and I do not want her crowded with questions." Mabel nodded. "I do not crowd children. I am not looking for a mother for her." The words came quicker than the rest. Mabel looked at him then. His jaw was set hard, but there was a weariness around his eyes that did not belong to anger. "I did not offer to be one." Lily's hand tightened around her finger. Ethan noticed. His gaze dropped, then returned to the road. "When I find someone proper, the arrangement ends." Mabel gave a small breath that was not quite a laugh. "You have a fondness for that word. It is a useful word. It is a measuring word." He glanced at her. "Is that so?" "Yes, sir. Folks use it when they want to dress up what they really mean." Ethan guided the team around a bend where the road dipped toward a creek bed gone silver with spring runoff. "And what do you think I meant?" Mabel looked down at her patched gloves, at Lily's clean little hand over hers. "A woman who does not embarrass you in town. A woman who does not make church ladies whisper. A woman your daughter can stand beside without people smirking into their hymnals." Ethan said nothing. The silence that followed was not empty. It had weight. Mabel turned toward the passing fields. "Forgive me. You offered work. I should be grateful and quiet. I did not ask you to be quiet. Most men prefer it." The team slowed as they climbed the shallow rise beyond the creek. Wind moved through the grass, bending it all one direction, as if even the prairie knew how to bow when pushed long enough. Mabel slipped the folded paper deeper into her glove, but the motion tugged it loose. It fell between her boot and the wagon board, half open. Ethan saw it before she could reach down. He handed her the reins without asking, bent, and picked it up. "Mr. Whitaker, please." He did not unfold it fully, but enough. His eyes moved once across the front, then caught on the writing pressed through the back. There was another line there, smaller, meaner, written as if the hand that made it had wanted to twist the knife without showing the town. Even a lonely widower would turn away. Ethan held the paper very still. Mabel felt the blood leave her face. "That part was not meant to be read aloud," she said. "No," Ethan answered, his voice low. "It was meant to be carried." She reached for it. "I have carried worse." He gave it back, but his fingers did not release it at once. Their hands paused around the same scrap of paper while Lily watched from between them. "Who wrote it?" he asked. Mabel folded it carefully, making the edges match. Someone who knew which words would travel farthest. "Calvin Price." She did not answer. That was answer enough. Ethan looked ahead toward the mountains, where his ranch waited somewhere beyond the brown hills and cottonwood trees. "He was not speaking only to you." "No," Mabel said softly. "He was speaking to anyone who might think of choosing me." Ethan took the reins again. His face had gone quiet in a dangerous way, not loud, not wild, only closed like a door barred from the inside. "Then he has made himself plain." Mabel tucked the note into her basket beneath the cloth napkin. Lily leaned against her arm, and for one breath, Mabel let herself stay there, held by a child and carried toward a house that did not want her yet. Ahead, the Whitaker Ridge Road turned west, and Ethan did not look back at town once. Whitaker Ridge appeared beyond the cottonwoods like a house that had been waiting too long for someone who never came back. The main cabin sat low against the slope, its porch boards gray from weather, its windows dull with dust, its roof patched in two places where winter had been unkind. A barn leaned behind it, wide and serviceable, with two horses nosing hay near the open door. Nothing was broken beyond repair, Mabel thought as Ethan drew the wagon to a stop, but everything looked as if it had learned to live without being touched. Lily climbed down before her father could lift her, then turned and reached both hands up for Mabel. That small invitation nearly undid her more than the town had. Mabel stepped carefully to the ground, holding the biscuit basket against her side, and followed Ethan across the porch. He opened the door and stood back. "Kitchen is through there," he said. "Your room is behind it. Pantry is low, but there is flour, beans, dried beef, potatoes, and coffee. Water pump is out back. Stove draws poorly unless the side vent is opened first." He spoke like a man giving orders to a hired hand, but his eyes moved once toward Lily to see if she was still close. She was. The inside of the house was colder than the day outside. Not cold in temperature only, but cold in the way a room becomes when laughter has not passed through it in a long while. A woman's shawl hung on a peg by the door, faded blue and untouched. A rocking chair sat by the window with a folded quilt over one arm. There were 3 places at the table, but one plate on the shelf had gathered more dust than the others. Mabel saw it all and asked nothing. Questions could be another kind of trespass. She set her basket down, removed her gloves, rolled up her sleeves, and went straight to the stove. "May I?" she asked. Ethan seemed surprised by the question. "You are here to cook. That is not the same as taking over." He looked at her for a long second. "Go on then." Mabel opened the side vent, cleared old ash, laid kindling, and coaxed a flame up slow and steady. Lily sat on the floor near the table with her knees drawn to her chest, watching every movement. Mabel did not speak at her. She hummed under her breath while she worked, soft enough that it did not demand attention. Flour went into a chipped bowl. Lard followed. A pinch of salt. Milk from a stone crock that was still good by the smell of it. She pressed biscuit dough with hands that knew what to do when the heart did not. Ethan carried water in, then another armload of wood, and each time he returned he paused at the kitchen door as if the sound of work inside his own house was unfamiliar. "Supper will not be fancy," Mabel said. "I can make stew stretch if you do not mind it plain." "Plain is fine. Children often eat better if the first bite feels like their own idea." Ethan looked toward Lily. "She has not eaten much of anything worth counting lately." Mabel did not turn too quickly. She cut one small biscuit with the rim of a cup and placed it near the edge of the table when it came from the oven, split open with a little butter melting into it. "This one came out too small for grown folks," she said gently, to no one in particular. "Shame to waste it." Lily stared at it. Mabel stirred the stew and kept her back half turned, giving the child privacy enough to be brave. A minute passed. Then another. A chair scraped softly. When Ethan stepped into the kitchen, Lily was standing beside Mabel, taking careful bites from the biscuit in her hand. Crumbs clung to her mouth. Her eyes stayed on the stove flame. Ethan stopped so suddenly the water in the pail trembled. Mabel saw his face change and looked away to spare him being witnessed. "Stew is near ready," she said. "Bowls are where?" He cleared his throat. "Top shelf. Left side." At supper, Lily finished the biscuit and half a bowl of stew. Ethan ate in silence, but not the empty kind from the wagon. This silence had listening in it. After the dishes were washed and the lamp burned low, Mabel found the small room behind the kitchen with a narrow bed and a clean quilt folded at the foot. She set the cruel note beneath her basket cloth and sat on the edge of the bed, too tired to remove her shoes. Just before sleep took her, she heard the floorboards whisper outside her door. When she opened it, Lily was curled on the hallway rug with her doll tucked under one arm, already asleep. Mabel stood there with one hand over her mouth. From the darkened main room, Ethan's voice came softly. "She has not slept outside my door in months." Mabel looked down at the child, then back toward the stove where one red coal still glowed. "Then we had best not wake her," she whispered, and for the first time since the church steps, the house did not feel quite so dead. Morning came pale and quiet over Whitaker Ridge, with mist lying low in the grass and the first sun catching on the pump handle behind the kitchen. Mabel had been awake long before the rooster called. She folded the quilt at the foot of her narrow bed, smoothed the pillow with both hands, and stood for a moment listening to the house breathe. Lily was still asleep on the hallway rug, one cheek pressed to her doll, her small hand open as if she had been reaching for something in a dream. Mabel stepped around her carefully, carrying her shoes instead of wearing them. In the kitchen, She left biscuit dough covered near the stove, coffee measured in the pot, and a note on the table that said only, "Thank you for the work. I am sorry I could not stay." The words looked poor and thin, but if she wrote more, she might not leave at all. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth, hay, and wood smoke fading from the chimney. She crossed the yard with her small carpet bag in one hand and the basket in the other, moving toward the barn where the road dipped away from the ranch. She told herself it was kindness. Lily had looked at her as if need could become love if left alone too long. Ethan had watched his daughter sleep outside Mabel's door with a face so bare it frightened her. A lonely child could mistake any soft hand for a promise. A grieving man could mistake a warm kitchen for a future. And Mabel hardly knew what happened when people woke from such mistakes. She had one boot on the lower fence rail when Ethan's voice came from behind her. "Where are you going?" She closed her eyes. Not because he sounded angry. He did not. That was worse. She turned slowly. He stood near the barn door in his work shirt, hair still damp from the wash basin, hat in one hand. "Back to town," she said. "On foot. It is only 6 miles. With that bag. It is not heavy." His eyes moved to the basket on her arm. "You made breakfast before leaving. The dough is ready. Coffee is measured. Lily likes the smaller biscuits." He looked toward the house, then back at her. "You planned it all out." "I tried to be useful." "That is not what I asked." Mabel gripped the basket handle. The cane pressed into her palm. "I am leaving before your daughter needs me too much." Ethan took one slow step closer. "And if she already does?" Mabel shook her head. "Then I have already done wrong by staying the night." "You did no wrong." "You do not know that." Her voice caught, and she hated it. She set the basket on the fence post to steady herself. 2 years ago, I was meant to marry Thomas Bell and Helena. My dress was finished. The church was swept. My aunt had baked 3 pies because she said even a thin wedding needed a generous table. Ethan said nothing, and, because he said nothing, the rest came out. He did not come to the church. He sent his brother with a folded note. I thought it was illness. I thought maybe there had been an accident. But the note said he had thought better of it. It said no man with pride would stand before God beside a woman built like me. The barn was still except for a horse shifting softly inside. Mabel looked past Ethan toward the hill because looking at his face would undo her. By supper, everyone knew. By the next morning, children were repeating it outside the bakery. I left Helena with one trunk and less dignity than fit inside it. Yesterday was not the first note. It was only the first one this town got to enjoy. Ethan's hand closed slowly around the brim of his hat. And do you think leaving keeps Lily safe from that? I think staying teaches her to love someone the world enjoys hurting. Maybe she already knows something the world does not. Mabel gave a sad little smile. Children can be wrong. So can towns. He turned, walked to the back door, and returned with a small iron key in his palm. He held it out. Mabel stared at it. What is that? Kitchen key. Mr. Whitaker. Ethan. The correction was quiet. Stay until she does not need you. If that day comes. Mabel did not take the key. You said 1 week. I said a lot of things yesterday before my daughter slept through the night for the first time in months. From the house came the faint scrape of the back door opening. Lily stood barefoot on the threshold, hair tangled, doll hanging from one hand, eyes fixed on Mabel's bag. She did not cry. She only looked smaller than any child should look in a doorway. Mabel's breath left her. Ethan placed the key on top of the fence post beside the basket and stepped back, giving her room to choose. The morning wind lifted the corner of her farewell note from where it lay on the kitchen table inside, and through the open door Mabel could see the stove waiting, the dough rising, and Lily standing between the life she had known and the one she was afraid to lose. Mabel took the kitchen key before the sun cleared the ridge, not because she believed she belonged there, but because Lily stood barefoot in the doorway looking at her as if leaving would turn the whole house cold again. She carried her bag back inside without a word, set it beneath the narrow bed, and returned to the stove. Ethan did not smile. He only picked up the farewell note from the table, folded it once, and laid it beside the flour tin where she could decide later whether to burn it or keep it. By breakfast, the house sounded different. Coffee bubbled. Biscuits split open under Mabel's hands. Lily sat at the table with her doll in her lap and watched every movement, as if each ordinary thing was a wonder. Ethan ate 2 biscuits and half a plate of eggs before he seemed to realize he had stayed inside instead of carrying his meal to the porch. Mabel noticed, but she did not tease him. Some changes had to be treated gently, or they would run for cover. The days that followed settled into a rhythm no one admitted to needing. Mabel rose before dawn, opened the stove vent, and made the kitchen smell of coffee, cornmeal, and warm bread. Ethan brought in water without being asked. Lily began leaving little objects near Mabel's mixing bowl, a smooth white stone, a blue ribbon, a feather from the yard. She still spoke rarely, but she stayed closer. At noon, when the hired hands came in from fence work, they removed their hats before entering the kitchen because Ethan looked at them once, and that was enough. At supper, Lily ate beside Mabel instead of across from her father. By the 4th night, Ethan came in before dark with his sleeves rolled down and his hands washed, as if the table had become an appointment he meant to keep. On the 5th morning, Mabel found a drawing beside the coffee pot. It was made with a bit of stove charcoal on brown wrapping paper. 3 figures stood beneath a crooked roof, a tall man in a hat, a small girl with a round face, and a woman in an apron between them. Mabel touched the paper with one finger and did not breathe for a moment. Ethan saw it from the doorway. "She drew you tall," he said. Mabel gave a faint laugh. "She drew me in the middle." Lily stood behind the pantry door, watching. Mabel folded the drawing carefully and placed it on the shelf beside the good plates. "Then I had better stand steady," she whispered. But steady things attracted notice. By the end of the week, Coldwater Creek had made a story of them. At the Mercantile, Mrs. Adler asked too loudly whether Ethan had grown desperate enough to hire affection by the week. At the feed yard, Calvin Price said Mabel must be fixing to call herself mistress of Whitaker Ridge before the month was out. Ethan heard none of it that day, but Lily did. She had gone with him to the schoolhouse to collect a reader from Miss Bell, and 2 older girls near the steps whispered that she had chosen the woman nobody else would take. Lily did not answer. She only held the reader tighter and stared at the ground. That afternoon, she returned home pale and silent, with her bonnet strings twisted into knots. Mabel knelt in the kitchen and loosened them without asking questions. "Some days are heavier than others," she said softly. Lily looked at her for a long time, then laid the school reader in Mabel's lap. Inside the front cover, written in a childish hand that was not Lily's, were the words, "Your papa brought shame home." Mabel closed the book slowly. Ethan came in from the barn and saw her face before she could hide it. "What happened?" he asked. Lily slipped behind Mabel's skirt. No one had time to answer before a rider from town arrived at the yard gate with a message from Miss Bell. Ethan was requested at the schoolhouse first thing in the morning. There had been talk. There had been concern. And when Ethan rode in with Mabel and Lily beside him the next day, the concern was already waiting. On the blackboard at the front of the little schoolroom, written large in white chalk for every child to see, was the sentence Coldwater Creek had not grown tired of repeating: "No man would want her." The schoolhouse smelled of chalk dust, damp wool, and yesterday's stove smoke. Mabel stood just inside the doorway with Lily pressed close to her skirt, and for one careful breath, she forgot how to move. The sentence on the blackboard was not long, but it filled the room like a sermon preached by cowards. Children sat at their desks with their hands folded, some frightened, some curious, some too young to understand why the grown folks had brought ugliness into a place meant for spelling and sums. Miss Bell stood near her desk, pale and tight around the mouth, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. Calvin Price leaned against the wall beside the pot-bellied stove as if the meeting belonged to him. Mrs. Adler was there too, along with 2 church women and Sheriff Nolan, who kept his hat in his hands and his eyes anywhere but on the board. Ethan stopped beside Mabel. He looked at the chalk words, then at Lily, then at the adults waiting for him to be embarrassed enough to obey. "Who wrote that?" he asked. No one answered. Calvin clicked his tongue. "Now, Ethan, that is not the matter at hand. It is the first matter. The matter," Mrs. Adler said, lifting her chin, "is the welfare of your daughter. There has been talk." Ethan turned his head slowly. There is always talk when people lack work. Her cheeks colored, but Calvin stepped in before she could answer. Folks are concerned, that is all. A widower living 6 miles out with a woman of uncertain reputation and a child already delicate in spirit. It raises questions. Mabel felt Lily's fingers gather more tightly in her dress. She laid one hand lightly over the child's hair. I can wait outside, Mabel said. Ethan did not look at her. No, Calvin smiled. You see? That right there is the trouble. She has been in your house 1 week, and already she speaks like she has a place in decisions. Mabel lifted her eyes. I said I would wait outside. Because you know you ought to. Miss Bell flinched at that, but said nothing. Mabel looked at the teacher, then at the children, then at the board. Shame had a strange way of making a person feel both too large and too small for the room they stood in. She crossed to the front slowly. The chalk tray held a rag stiff with dust. She picked it up and began wiping the words away. The first pass only smeared them. The second turned the white letters into cloudy streaks. Chalk coated her fingers, her palm, the cuff of her sleeve. Behind her, Calvin gave a soft laugh. You can wipe the board, Miss Hartley. You cannot wipe truth out of a town. Mabel kept wiping until the last pale mark disappeared. Then she folded the rag once and set it down. Her hand trembled, so she closed it into a fist against her apron. Truth does not hide behind school children, she said. The room went quiet. Ethan's gaze fixed on her, but she did not turn. If she turned, she might lean toward the one person in the room who looked ready to stand with her, and she could not let the town say she had borrowed her courage from a man. Mrs. Adler drew herself up. This is exactly what concerns us. Pride. Impropriety. Influence. Lily needs the company of respectable women. Lily made a small sound, hardly more than a breath. Mabel heard it. Ethan heard it. The room did not. Calvin pushed away from the wall. Let us speak plainly. Ethan, you have grief, and no one faults a man for reaching toward comfort. But this arrangement makes your daughter a subject of ridicule. Send the woman back to town. Pay her the week. Let this end clean. Lily moved before anyone else did. She stepped out from behind Mabel and crossed the little space between them, her shoes whispering over the wooden floor. Mabel shook her head, not wanting the child pulled into the center of it. But Lily came anyway. She took Mabel's chalk-covered hand in both of hers and held it against her chest. The white dust marked her dark dress. Mabel tried to pull away gently. Sweetheart, no. Lily looked up, tears bright but unshed. The children stared. Miss Bell covered her mouth. Calvin's expression hardened. Ethan took one step forward, but stopped when Lily turned toward him. Her voice came thin, frightened, and clear enough to reach every corner of the schoolhouse. Papa, do not let them send her away. Ethan had heard his daughter speak before in small, careful pieces, words left at the edge of a room like crumbs for someone patient enough to notice. But he had not heard her plead. Not since the fever took her mother and carried half the light out of Whitaker Ridge. The sound of it changed the schoolhouse. Children stopped shifting in their seats. Miss Bell lowered her hand from her mouth. Sheriff Nolan finally looked up. Mabel stood frozen at the front of the room with chalk dust on her sleeve and Lily holding her hand as if that hand were the only safe thing left in the world. Ethan crossed the room slowly. Not because he was uncertain. Because every eye in Coldwater Creek had spent years learning how to mistake loudness for strength, and he wanted them to see the difference. He stopped beside Mabel, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched hers, then placed one hand on the edge of the teacher's desk. No one is sending her anywhere, he said. His voice was quiet, but it struck the room harder than a shout. Calvin Price gave a dry little laugh. Careful, Ethan. You are making a public claim. Ethan turned his head. I know exactly what I am doing. Do you? A week ago she was washing linens for half the town and taking pity work where she could find it. Now you want folks to believe she belongs at your table. She does belong at my table. Mabel's breath caught. Lily's fingers tightened around hers. Ethan did not look away from Calvin. She belongs in my kitchen if she chooses to work there. She belongs under my roof if she chooses to stay there. And she belongs beside my daughter because my daughter has slept, eaten, and spoken more in 1 week with Miss Hartley than she has in months, with all of your proper concern." Mrs. Adler stiffened. "Mr. Whitaker, no one denies the child may have taken a liking to her, but children do not understand reputation." Ethan looked at the row of adults by the stove. "Children understand safety before grown folks learn how to fake it." The words settled deep. Miss Bell lowered her eyes. Sheriff Nolan rubbed one thumb along the brim of his hat. Calvin's face lost its easy polish. "You are letting sentiment make a fool of you." "No," Ethan said. "I let pride do that first." He turned then, not to Calvin, but to Mabel. She looked at him as if she did not trust the room, the moment, or mercy offered where others could see it. Chalk clung to her palm. Her face was pale, but her chin had not fallen. Ethan's voice softened, though everyone still heard him. "The first day my daughter took your hand, I should have thanked God out loud instead of pretending I was only hiring help." Mabel shook her head once, barely. "Ethan, let me finish." He faced the room again. "You all saw a woman you could laugh at because it cost you nothing. Lily saw a woman who knelt to speak gently when everyone else stood over her. I saw it too. I was just slower than my child." Calvin pushed away from the wall. "So that is it? The widower chooses the woman no one else would have." Ethan stepped in front of Mabel then, not hiding her, but standing with her. "The widower chooses the woman who brought warmth back to his house. And any man who writes another word about her, whispers another insult where my daughter can hear it, or uses children to carry grown folks' cruelty, will answer to me in daylight and with the sheriff standing present." Sheriff Nolan cleared his throat. "That is fair warning." Calvin looked at the sheriff as if betrayed, but Nolan only set his hat on his head. Mrs. Adler gathered her gloves in silence. One by one, the church women looked away. Mabel felt Lily move. The little girl took Mabel's chalked hand and placed it in Ethan's open palm. For a moment, all three of them stood joined by white dust, trembling fingers, and a choice no one in that room could take back. Ethan closed his hand gently around Mabel's, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She did not. Outside, the school bell rope tapped softly against the wall in the wind. Inside, Coldwater Creek had finally run out of laughter. By the time autumn laid gold across Whitaker Ridge, the house no longer sounded afraid of itself. Morning came with the crackle of the stove, the steady scrape of Ethan bringing in wood, the small patter of Lily's feet across the kitchen floor, and Mabel humming while she shaped dough beneath flour-white hands. The blue shawl that had once hung untouched by the door was folded away in a cedar chest, not forgotten, but no longer holding the whole house still. 3 places stayed set at the table now, and a 4th plate waited on the shelf for any traveler who needed a meal. The hard hands stopped speaking carefully around Mabel. They asked for more biscuits, praised her apple butter, and lowered their eyes if they tracked mud across her clean floor. Coldwater Creek changed more slowly, as towns do when they have been wrong too publicly to admit it all at once. Mrs. Adler sent a basket of thread and buttons without a note. Miss Bell asked Mabel to bring bread for the school supper. Sheriff Nolan touched his hat when she passed. Calvin Price still watched from the mercantile window, but his words found fewer ears willing to carry them. Mabel did not become smaller to make the town comfortable. She walked into shops with her shoulders back, her basket on her arm, and Lily's hand tucked proudly in hers. Ethan came with them often, not as a guard dog, not as a warning, but as a man who had learned that choosing someone in daylight mattered. One crisp Saturday, after the first frost silvered the grass, Mabel found a folded paper tucked beneath the cloth in her biscuit basket. Her hand stopped. The kitchen went quiet around her, though nothing had changed except the memory that rose too fast. She stared at the paper as if it might speak before she touched it. Ethan stood by the stove with a piece of firewood in his hand. Lily sat at the table pretending to mend a doll dress, though her needle had not moved for several minutes. Mabel opened the note carefully. The letters were large, crooked, and pressed hard into the page. "Mama, please do not leave." The room blurred. Mabel laid one hand on the table and the other over her mouth, but the tears came anyway, not sharp like shame, Not hot like humiliation, but deep and quiet, as if something frozen inside her had finally found spring. Lily slipped from her chair. "I asked Papa how to spell it," she said. Her voice was still small, but it did not hide anymore. Mabel sank to her knees, and Lily walked straight into her arms. "Oh, sweetheart," Mabel whispered. "I was not planning to leave." Lily held her tighter. Ethan set the firewood down and stood in the doorway between morning light and the warm kitchen, his hat in his hands the way men held sacred things. "She wanted to be sure," he said. Mabel looked up at him through tears. "And you?" Ethan crossed the room slowly. He took the old cruel note from the little wooden box on the shelf, the one she had kept not because she believed it, but because she wanted to remember what she had survived. He placed Lily's note beside it. One paper had tried to name her unwanted. The other had named her home. Ethan looked at Mabel, then at his daughter, then at the stove glowing behind them. "I am sure," he said. "I was sure the day this house began breathing again." Outside, the wind moved across the ridge and bent the dry grass toward winter. Inside, bread rose beneath a clean towel.